Martin Luther King, dueling celebrations here in Albany. Activist Alice Green brought her crowd across the street. There was the state celebration here, dueling sound systems. It was the people's celebration versus the state celebration, but they were two celebrations. Disheartening. If we're going to have racial harmony someday, we could at least start with one celebration, maybe? Fred LeBrun for News 10.
We'd like to hear your opinion. Call our comment line at 1-800.
Called for openness and investigation of alleged police brutality. Some say there have been several well-documented cases of harassment and brutality, but the issue has been allowed to fester in the dark.
We began in September to analyze a lot of the data, the complaints that we had received from people over the last couple of years, and also to look at what had happened to those complaints. And unfortunately, not a whole lot.
Last week, police rallied at the same spot, saying there was a rush to judgment in the case against officers William Benani and Sean McKenna. They're accused of beating St. Rose basketball player Jermaine Henderson. Police union leaders say there should have been a grand jury to decide if charges against the officers were warranted, and audio tapes played for the public should never have been released during an ongoing investigation. But the Urban League says that's the kind of silence that's creating the problem.
I think it's, in an information age, to talk about keeping things quiet and to sweep things under the carpet is dangerous. I think that's why the relationship has deteriorated to the point it's at now.
Aaron Dare says that relationship is very strained right now, and that's why the Urban League is calling for 2 public hearings, December 16th and 17th. The goal is to come up with ideas on how to establish true community policing, in their words.
Okay, and they need city cooperation for those public hearings? Or
they're hoping to pass on some recommendations to the mayor and the city police chief if they're not there at the meeting themselves.
All right. Thank you, Melissa, very much.
Belief in that dream is still strong among the people of America.
It was dark inside the convention center when protesters interrupted the governor and started yelling, "No more prisons." That's when state troopers moved right in. Police removed at least 2 activists speaking out against Pataki's push for more prisons, and the governor didn't seem bothered by it.
That, too, is in the tradition of Dr. King. That healthy give and take in a democracy, the right to speak out, the right to be heard, not necessarily this morning.
That's sad if he thinks that this is not the place.
Alice Green, one of those arrested, says Martin Luther King Day is the perfect opportunity to be heard.
If he really cared about Martin Luther King, he would institute a 5-year moratorium on prisons so that we are not imprisoning all of the African Americans and Latinos in this state.
But as long as we have violent criminals, as long as we have drug peddlers who would kill our children with drugs, we have a right to separate them from the people who obey the law and adhere to the law in this great state.
Green says troopers manhandled her when all she really wanted was a silent protest. Other protesters also disrupted the ceremony for other reasons, and Green says they also had the right to be heard, voicing an opinion on a day dedicated to a man whose opinions bettered a nation. Reporting to you from Albany, Sarah Welch, News 10.
Police say they were not trying to stop people from speaking out. They wanted to keep the peace. Coming up later on News 10 at 6 o'clock, more on the Capital Region remembering Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Tracy.
Empire State Plaza was disrupted today when state police allegedly manhandled and arrested 2 protesters. Governor Pataki had been speaking for only about a minute when demonstrators unfurled a banner saying "No more prisons." They say it was meant as a silent protest, but when state troopers ripped the signs from their hands, they started shouting. Alice Green of the Center for Law and Justice and her husband Charles Toohey, a low-income housing developer, were arrested for disorderly conduct. They say they were just exercising their right to free speech. A spokeswoman for State Police Superintendent James McMahon says they were arrested only after they refused to quiet down after repeatedly being asked to do so. Alice Green joins us live now from our Albany News Center to give us her account of this morning's incident and talk more about the issue that brought all this about in the first place. Alice, thanks for being with us tonight.
Thank you.
Do you agree with the State Police Superintendent that they in fact only came at you when you refused to quiet down?
That's not true. We were there for a silent demonstration to protest the over-incarceration of African Americans and Latinos and to call for a 5-year moratorium on prison construction. We took our banner, and when we opened it, the police jumped on us.
Without provocation?
Without provocation. It was a silent demonstration up to that point. And once they struggled with us, we did start, or at least I did, start to yell and to talk about the issue that we wanted to get before the audience and the governor.
But that was not your intention before that?
Absolutely
to make
not.
any kind of public statement, merely to sit and listen to the governor and hold up your sign?
Absolutely. One of the state troopers told me that I was not allowed to do it. Later, he told me this, because it was a religious observance.
Do you believe, our reporter Judy Sanders, who was there, pointed out that this was state police who were involved in this as opposed to Capitol Police who have been involved in situations where you have protested before. Do you believe the state police were more aggressive than Capitol Police in handling this, and perhaps inappropriately so?
Yes, they absolutely were. We had no expectations that they would pounce on us the way they did. They have caused great pain to me right now.
Pain, you don't mean physical pain?
Physical pain, yes.
Physical
pain.
They
use excessive force in removing me from the convention center.
How were you hurt?
Well, right now I'm having pain in my ribs and my arm and my legs.
Did you make them aware of that as you were being let out?
I told them that they were hurting me. That's one of the reasons why I was crying out, because they were squeezing my ribs.
Do you plan on following up on that, Alice?
Well, I'm going to decide what to do. We have to be in court tomorrow, and I will decide what I will do later.
To me, anyhow, it seems that there is an irony here in that in the past, at similar events, you have been much more in your face, if you don't mind my using that expression, with the governor, having gone up and actually spoken to him and loudly about issues that you were concerned with, and yet this was the time you were arrested.
Yes, and as I said, it was a silent demonstration, so I'm really perplexed, and especially on Martin Luther King Day, when we were trying to follow the principles and teachings of Dr. Martin Luther King and bringing to the public injustice as we see it.
Let me just give you a chance then to make sure that you've made your point clear then in terms of no more prisons. You're not saying that there's not a need for them?
Oh, I'm not saying that at all. Right now, New York State does not need any more prisons for violent offenders. The Rockefeller drug law and the second felony offender law are causing a great number of people to be incarcerated. These are usually drug offenders who are nonviolent, and they could certainly be treated in the community rather than put into prison. And the space that we now have in prisons can be reserved for those who must be incarcerated, violent offenders.
Do you have any idea what will happen in court tomorrow?
No, I know I was illegally arrested, and I'm hoping that the judge will understand that.
And I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you are at least considering legal action at this point?
Well, I'm going to think about it, yes.
Alice Green, thank you very much for being with us. We'll certainly be following this story as it continues.
Thank you.
Good evening, I'm Benita Zahn. John is off tonight. Today the nation celebrates the message of Dr. Martin Luther King, but here in Albany, the holiday was marked by a protest against Governor Pataki's policies during his speech. We have team coverage of today's events, and we begin with Bill Lambton with the Capitol commemorations of Martin Luther King Day. Bill.
Benita, he may have stood for nonviolent civil disobedience, but that doesn't mean it would be tolerated today at the Capitol ceremony in Dr. King's honor. More on that in a minute. We begin the way the day did. This is the 13th year that official Albany has gathered to honor Dr. King's memory.
The weapons of his war are love, peace, and brotherhood.
Well, as we know, he could see and envision things long before us. We have not yet gotten to the mountaintop.
Governor Pataki dropped out after the convention center ceremony, but a good part of the remainder of official Albany marched to the King Memorial in Lincoln Park, where a wreath was laid. Apart from speeches, some here are remembering Dr. King with their thoughts and their actions.
We're doing a cleanup in our community area. Despite the snow, but we have targeted some houses that need some cleanup.
We need to remember that no one is better than another person by their color, by their skin, but by their character.
One day right there in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today.
And as you know, Martin Luther King made that speech in front of the Lincoln Memorial in the early 60s. He was slain in Memphis 30 years ago.
It seems hard for me to believe that it is 30 years.
Yeah, and to think of all the Americans who were not even alive when he was killed.
You said your story was the way the day began. We move now to the next part of the story. Local activist Alice Green of the Center for Law and Justice used the annual Martin Luther King commemoration to call for a moratorium on prison construction and expansion. Monica Mahaffey is live in our newsroom with more. Monica?
Benita, the Center for Law and Justice wants the state to put 3,100 new prison beds on hold for 5 years. Green says she was holding a silent demonstration at the event and was hauled away by state troopers in violation of her right to free speech. The annual celebration at the Empire State Convention Center began with prayer, songs, and speeches, a celebration meant to remind observers of Dr. King's teachings. But 3 minutes into the governor's speech, this is what happened.
30 years later, the belief in that dream is still strong among the people of America.
Green and another audience member were taken out of the center, arrested, and charged with disorderly conduct. Green says the state will fill 3,100 new prison beds with African Americans and Latinos. She wants the state to release low-level drug offenders into treatment programs. But the state says the new prison beds are for violent felons, not drug dealers, and that 10,000 non-violent criminals have been released from prison before their minimum sentence and put into treatment programs. Green was issued an appearance ticket to be back in Albany City Court tomorrow. Benita?
Thanks, Monica.
Slain civil rights leader Martin Luther King. But as Governor Pataki took the podium, a small group of protesters unfurled a sign and chanted "No more prisons" as state police forcibly took them from the convention center. The crowd of 2,000 cheered the protesters, then applauded Governor Pataki when he said prisons are needed to keep communities safe.
We should have no more prisons, but as long as we have violent criminals, as long as we have drug peddlers who would kill our children with drugs, we have a right to separate them from the people who obey the law and adhere to the law in this great state.
The governor added they had a right to protest, but not this morning. Alice Green of the Center for Law and Justice and her husband, low-income housing developer Charles Toohey, were arrested for disorderly conduct. They say it's ironic that she was allegedly manhandled during what started out as a silent protest, in keeping with King's nonviolent tactics.
It was my honor and my pleasure. I believe that if Martin Luther King were here, he would take on this issue. It's a civil rights issue. We're filling the prisons up with black people and brown people, and I think Martin Luther King would have been here and done the same thing.
And security came and tried to rip the sign out of our hands. When we held on to our sign, they forcibly removed us. They picked Alice up like a rag doll and threw her out.
But for the others who attended the ceremony, many of them school children, King's larger legacy is one of hope that blacks and whites can live together, respecting each other.
He means power, and he means like love for Jesus, and he wants everybody to be equal.
And he said that white kids can go with black kids to school, and he changed all the laws.
After the commemoration, there was a memorial march and wreath-laying ceremony at the Martin Luther King Monument in Lincoln Park, and blacks and whites together joined in a call for peace and equality.
We shall live in peace someday.
The disorderly conduct charge is a violation, and Alice Green and Charles Toohey must appear in police court tomorrow morning. State police say they were arrested only after they refused to quiet down after they've been asked to do so repeatedly. Jack?
Is there any indication how they are going to plead tomorrow?
Absolutely not guilty.
Papers to ask that the charge of disorderly conduct be dropped. Green was arrested on Martin Luther King Day during a speech given by Governor Pataki. This conduct clash is stirring up issues of constitutional rights. Bianca De La Garza reports to you.
This was the scene on Martin Luther King Day. Activist Alice Green removed during Governor Pataki's speech and charged with disorderly conduct, a charge she and her lawyer want thrown out, accusing the governor of ignoring her right to free speech.
Governor Pataki and his police officers violated the First Amendment right of a citizen to protest in a public forum.
The police officers jumped me. They took the banner and they physically carried me out of the convention center and detained me for almost a half an hour.
Green was protesting the building of more jails in New York State. She alleges her group was holding up a banner in a silent protest until police came over. That's when the shouting started. Pataki's office says, quote, "This is an issue that's been exclusively handled by the Albany County DA's office. It's been entirely their decision on how to proceed with this," end quote.
The state would have to show that someone's conduct went so far as to go beyond the boundaries of legitimate free speech.
Attorney Peter Denzinger says the law of free speech is broadly defined.
Really, unless someone's conduct is really disorderly and disruptive, beyond just annoying, really the Constitution won't permit criminal sanctions for that kind of conduct.
Green's husband, Charles Toohey, was also arrested that day. The DA's office will now get a chance to review the papers that were filed today. Green is due back in court May 1st. Elisa?
It's not easy.
It's still rolling.
Okay, I can start, right?